Hello, everybody. Welcome back to English Champion. On this episode, I want to make something that sounds very complicated into something that's very easy, actually. It's not necessarily easy to do, but it's easy to understand. And then once you understand it, you can figure out how to do it best for you in a way that is easier for you. And this is specifically for teachers, okay? I've noticed, maybe it's always been this way, but maybe I'm just noticing it now, that in the last few years especially, everything becomes overly jargonized. Everything has to have some clever abbreviation or acronym, and most of the time, it's just repeating things that normal people, smart people have been doing for a very long time. And the world of education is one of the seemingly the worst areas for that. Business is also the same. You can't listen to any business discussion on YouTube without people throwing around all these pieces of jargon. And I think it's just to make people sound like they're smarter than they probably are. And not only to make you sound smart, but to also make it look like you're offering something new. When if you just dig down a little bit, it's like, oh, yeah, we've been doing this for ever, so this isn't new. You're just repackaging it to make yourself sound more interesting. And so business is very guilty of this. The world of sports is the same way. As someone who has been involved in sports for a long time and I'm a coach, it's amazing how many things I hear online of people using these, clever sounding terms and these brilliant new concepts. It's like, nope, this stuff is old. We've all been doing this forever. This isn't new. And in fact, some of the new things that you're offering are actually worse than the old ways. You're trying to hope that people find the newness of it appealing. And really, you just need to get back to basics. And so, again, whether it's business, sports, education is one of the worst, where there's constantly these newfangled ideas and they're called by different names. And really, teaching is not that hard, okay? It's very simple. You have to be very smart to do it. But if you're that type of person, it's really not that complicated. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to take basically the essence of teaching and distill it down to what you really need to know, because it's not that hard. You don't need to have all these fancy terms. You don't need these weird techniques. It's really pretty basic, okay? And I've made it as easy as possible for you by giving them all three of these by the letter A, all right? So these are the three A's of simplifying your teaching. Again, these aren't necessarily super easy to implement because you're going to have to figure out what works best for you. But the goal that we're aiming at is always the same. And if you're not pursuing these three A's, you're either making your teaching way too difficult, or you are you're just doing it in a very roundabout way. Okay, you're focusing on things that really don't matter, and it's wasting a lot of your time probably. So whether you are a parent or an individual tutor, or you work with small groups, or even if you work with large classrooms, I'm going to talk about how you can do this even in a large classroom. The goals are these three things. So here we go. Number one, how do you know if someone is really smart/talented? How can you immediately tell that someone is very skilled, either with some activity they can do or with the knowledge they possess? Think about it for a second. How do you know? What's the best way to tell if someone truly knows what they're doing or what they're talking about? It's usually that they can do that thing quite quickly. And the reason they can do that thing quite quickly, whether it's a skill or recalling some piece of information, is because they've made it automatic. Automaticity is the whole goal of learning. There really is nothing else, okay? If your goal isn't to make whatever you're teaching to your students automatic, then there is no point. You're wasting your time. If it's just, oh, we're just going to go over this thing today to say I went over it, or so that the kids can maybe take a quiz on it tomorrow and then they'll forget it, then it doesn't matter, all right? The goal with anything is to make things automatic. So how do you know the difference between a brand new driver who's 16 and someone who's old like me and has been driving for 30 years? What's the difference? Well, they can drive automatically. They don't have to think about all the complicated things you're actually doing when you're driving. You just do it because you've practiced a million times. So whether it's driving or playing a musical instrument, how do you know if someone's good at playing music? Well, they do it automatically. They don't have to think about it. They don't have to think, where does this finger go on the piano, or where does my hand go on the guitar? Like, nope, they just do it. That's how you know you're good at something. That's how you know you've learned something. How can you tell if someone is a great, you know, literature professor? Well, they can immediately recall the things they've been studying for all those years, and they can give a lecture, they can give a presentation of some kind, and it's already in there. It's easy to recall. How do you know if someone's a great basketball player? Well, they don't have to think about every time they're dribbling. They don't have to think about where their hands are when they're getting ready to shoot. They just do it. So making everything automatic is the sign that you are an intelligent person, at least in that thing, whatever that is. You know, how can you tell if someone is good at math? Well, they know their math facts. You know, a kid is good at math. They know their math facts immediately. And then you can start working with them on how to implement those math facts, but you have to know the basics and it has to be automatic. So everything that we do as teachers should be pointed toward making this thing, whatever content area it is or skill area it is, automatic. So in my classes as an English professor, how do I make writing automatic? Well, we go over writing prompts a million times. I show a million samples. I go through it with them. I give them, you know, they watch me do it live in front of them. And then we implement formulas and we say, look, here's generally how a paragraph flows. Here's generally how a whole essay flows. Here's what good sentences look like. Let's break it down into pieces. Let's get practice at doing those basic things. And then after a while, they don't have to think about it. I would do this with my students where I would say, okay, we're going to take the hour today, and I want you to write an essay on whatever topic you want. And I would ask them, I'd say, give me a topic. Tell me, what do you want me to write about? And make it really random, you know, as best as you can. And so they give me a topic, and I say, okay, great. And so we'd all sit down in the class, and we'd type up in, you know, whatever, 2 or 3 page essay, let's say. And by the end of the hour, we'd take a look, and where we'd look at them the next class period and see how they came out. And, you know, young people, of course, really struggle with this because even though they're at college, they haven't exactly practiced writing enough that it has become automatic. And so, you know, it takes them the whole hour to write a 2 page essay. Well, I can write a 2 page essay on any topic in just a few minutes, and it sounds perfect. There's no grammar problems. The structure is beautiful. There's a great introduction. It ties up nicely. It teaches the reader something, or it persuades them of something. I can do it with no problem. Well, why? Because it's automatic for me, because I've been doing it forever. And so if we want to get our kids smarter in a writing class, you've got to teach them the techniques so that it becomes automatic. So once they do it enough times, they don't really have to think about it anymore. They just go, oh, I have to write this kind of paper. It's this long, it has to have this kind of emphasis in it. And now all I need to worry about is the topic. I just apply the topic to the formula that I have gotten a lot of practice with, and it's automatic. It's not hard. So as you get older into graduate school where you're writing lots and lots of papers, yeah, you don't really panic that much because you're going, yeah, I know the formula. I know how this goes. Yeah, this paper is way longer and more complicated than the other ones, but it's still the same process because it's automatic. I already know how to do this. No problem. So that's where we want to get, whether it's in writing, whether it's in math. That's why memorization is so important. Whether it's in, you know, history. You know, if your teacher asks you a question about the Civil War, or you're just among people and a topic of some important time period comes up, and you have to sit there and go, now wait a second, when were the years, and who was the president during that time, and what was the South doing, and what was the difference, and who are the generals? Like, if you constantly have to think about those things, or you have to go look them up every time, one, if it's in a class environment, you're not going to do well in that class. And two, if you're having a conversation with somebody, they're not going to want to talk to you because you clearly don't know anything. And so getting things automatic, where in a history discussion, having some basic things that are right there ready to go is very, very helpful. And it's the indicator of whether you've learned it and whether you're smart or not. So we have to get to a point in any class where the students have to think less and less about what it is they're doing and what it is they're learning and working on, because you got to teach them new stuff. And the world is endlessly complicated. And so if you're constantly spending time rehashing and having to rethink all the basic facts that you should already know, you're just wasting a ton of brain energy. What your brain wants to do all the time is make everything automatic. The more your brain has to think about things, the more energy it wastes, which means it has less energy to focus on all the brand new things that are coming into your world. All right. So it's just like, again, as an athlete, as a basketball player, a good basketball player does things without having to really think about it. It seems weird because basketball is so fast paced and there's all sorts of stuff going on. There's 9 other guys you got to keep track of. There's the clock. There's the coaches yelling. There's fans screaming at you. There's all this stuff going on. But really good players don't focus on any of that. They just do it. And yes, at some points of the game, you want to implement some strategies, but that's where your focus comes in. That's where you go, okay, I've been doing things on automatic for this whole game. We're in crunch time now. I need to get this right. So we're going to implement this play and I'm going to cut to this part of the court. I'm going to make that pass. Yeah, that's when you have to really focus in. But for the rest of the time, if you did that all the time, you would be exhausted. And frankly, you'd never get anything done because your brain is having to work so hard that you would kind of be frozen. You have to make things automatic if you're going to be any good at anything. So it's the same, again, in music or any other part, or driving a car. If you're focusing on every single thing on the road, oh my gosh, that's why teenagers have their hands gripped to that steering wheel so tight and their eyes are all over the place and they can't, they can't do multiple things at once. Like the radio needs to be turned off and they can't be doing it. Meanwhile, when you're older, you can have the radio on loud, you can be singing along, you can be talking with your friends, you could be eating a cheeseburger, uh, you know, what you shouldn't be doing, but you can, as you can kind of see who's calling me and maybe take a phone call while you're driving. I mean, you can do all sorts of things. Why? Because the driving is automatic. If you're focusing on the driving, you're probably not a good driver. Um, so, as a teacher, this has to be our entire goal. Everything you're doing for your students is to get them to a state of automaticity. The thing that's been going on lately in the online education world is, again, the newfangled jargon and all this stuff about, types of instruction and whether it's direct or explicit or whatever. And then, cognitive load theory. Like, this isn't new. Anyone who knows anything about good teaching and how the brain works has been doing this forever. So when you hear cognitive load theory, yes, it's correct, but it's not new. And it's so funny. I'm reading things on Twitter or things online and people are like, oh, teachers, you have to do this. This is so great. It's so helpful. Like, what in the world have you been doing in the meantime? Because this is what all of us normal teachers have been doing forever. Okay. It employs, Vygotsky's stuff where, you take something that's students are already aware of, and then you slowly push them to something a little more challenging, and then you work on that for a while, and then you go a little bit further. Like, this is all basic stuff. This is all moving things from the present, the working memory, like, okay, what do I need to know for right now, into the long-term memory. And the long-term memory is the automaticity. Again, where you don't have to think about it anymore. It's already in there. I don't have to study anymore. I've got it already. So whenever you hear these new ideas and these teachers are thinking they have these new brilliant solutions to teaching, no, that's not it. Okay, this is all old stuff. And I was in college learning these things 20, whatever it's been, 28 years ago, 27 years ago. Like, these things aren't new. Okay, you teach things directly to the kid. You say, here's what we need to know, and you work through it. And part of the working through it is you deliberately practice. So if you read anything by Anders Ericsson, his thing he's famous for is deliberate practice. And in one of his books, he talks about how there's really only 3 ways you can learn anything. One is you can actually learn things kind of mindlessly if you have it repeated enough. This is why if you hear a song on the radio like 10 times, after the 10th time or however long it takes you, you can sing the song word for word. You weren't trying to memorize it. You didn't sit down with the lyrics and go over it and practice singing it along. No, you just heard it enough times that it just seeped in there and now you know it. It's crazy how many songs from my childhood that I haven't heard literally in 40 years that will pop up on the radio. I'll hear it in a movie or something, and I know the lyrics to it. Why? Because I heard it repetitively enough when I was a kid that it's still in there after all these years. Now, it doesn't work for everything. Some things do degrade, obviously, but yeah, there are some things that just stay in there even if you didn't try to put it in there in the first place. So repetition, even if you're not even trying to learn it, you can learn it because it does work its way into your long-term memory. The second way that we learn things is that Erickson talks about is kind of through your motor skills. Your body can learn things without you really having to think about it or even understand what it is you're doing. It's kind of like riding a bike. Like, your brain doesn't know what you're doing when you're riding a bike. Yet, how come when you're 5 years old, you can climb on and inside of 5 minutes you have it figured out? It's because your body has its own sort of form of intelligence that it can figure out things that it needs to do without you having to actually focus on doing that. Yeah, you're focusing on keeping your balance and you got to remember to pedal and all that stuff. But again, it's not that hard because your body just sort of finds the natural place to keep yourself moving forward on this two-wheeled contraption. And so a lot of things are like that. A lot of stuff in sports is sort of like that. You can learn to throw kind of just by doing it. Now, there are better ways to do it, and that's where a good coach comes in. But you can learn how to do all sorts of stuff by just your body figuring it out. So just sheer repetition, even without trying to learn. The second is things that are more physical, that your body sort of learns on its own. And the third way, which is what all of real teaching is through deliberate practice. You actually have to choose to practice that thing or study that thing. And you have to develop those strategies for putting it in your long-term memory. So if you're not doing things deliberately, it's never going to stick. So this is what I would talk about with my college students all the time is, I only meet with you twice a week at the college level. So, and I'm not going to repeat myself on certain things every single day. So you can't just learn what I'm going to teach you in our English composition class surely through blind repetition, where you're not really paying attention yet somehow it seeps in there. That's just not going to work. I don't see you often enough, and I don't repeat myself in that specific way often enough. So it's not going to sink in. What we're doing isn't necessarily a physical thing, so it's not that. So you have to, if you're going to be in my class, you have to choose to listen and practice and learn what I'm teaching you. And I'm going to help you do that, but we're going to do this deliberately. There has to be a system for taking the things I'm talking about in class and then applying them to how you do them so that it sticks in your brain in the long term. Not just the short term. The short term is where you know it well enough to pass a test or to hand in one essay, but then you have to start from scratch on the next essay or in the next course next year because you forgot everything. That means you didn't deliberately practice, again, whatever that course content is. So this is where things become automatic, is you deliberately practice them thoroughly enough and with the right practice techniques that it starts to stick in there and you don't have to think about it as much. So when I'm dribbling a basketball between my legs, I don't have to think about what my legs are doing. I don't have to think about where the ball is and whether it's on my fingertips or touching some other part of my hand. It just happens automatically. Yes, there's a body component to it, but I deliberately, when I was a kid, would practice those dribbling skills for hours and hours and hours so that I didn't have to think about it anymore. Let me give an example between the difference between deliberate practice and just sort of going through the motions a little bit, okay? I can play guitar and piano at a very rudimentary level, okay? I can play well enough that, someone listening would recognize, oh, that's this song, okay? So, I can do it well enough. And I was able to do those things just by practicing very minimally, all right? You memorize the chords and where your hands go on both instruments, and you do that enough and you kind of get it. So there is some deliberate practice involved. But the difference between someone who kind of fakes their way through playing music, and I can, if someone wants to sing or, other people want to play instruments, I can play along and, kind of be in a band in like the most blended in, obscure way. Like I can be a part of this, but I'm not going to be the lead soloist or anything. What's the difference between me, who's a very average musical instrument player, and someone who's actually a professional? Well, they deliberately practice all of the teeny tiny finger movements and all of the music theory structures. They know all of that because they practice that stuff on purpose over and over and over again. I can't do any of those things. Why? Because I don't deliberately practice that way. I play for fun. I play because I like certain songs and I just enjoy the kind of creative outlet of just hearing sounds and hearing cool songs that I like. That's it. And then knowing that I can play them, sort of. But I'm not nearly as good as people who do this every single day for many hours a day and become expert at it. So again, you can kind of fake your way. And that's what a lot of schooling is kids, they can fake their way through it for a while. But then as you get older, those skills or those pieces of knowledge get exposed because it's like, yeah, you didn't actually learn it. It's not stuck in your brain in the long term. And it starts becoming very apparent at the high school level, and then definitely at the college level, and then definitely at the graduate school level, where there's the levels of like, well, how smart are you actually? How well do you know this stuff? And if all we're doing is teaching kids, well, you need to know it so you can take this test or so you can write this essay about it, yeah, you can get by on that for a while. Um, you know, kids can fake their way through a lot. They can look like they sound smart, and they're enough to impress the teacher a little bit, but it doesn't mean you've genuinely learned it or that you're actually a smart person or a talented person. So what we got to figure out with our students is, okay, what's my goal? Is my goal to just have them take a quiz? Because that's very easy. You can just repeat something over and over. They don't actually have to learn it. They can just hear it enough times, and by Friday when they have the quiz, they'll probably be fine. But then by Monday, they've forgotten it. So you have to build in systems where it becomes automatic, and that happens through deliberate practice. So the first A is automaticity. We've got to make things automatic for students. The second is, well, how do you make things automatic? Well, you do it through the practice, but you usually need someone helping you through the practice. And so the second A is accountability. Yes, people can learn things on their own, obviously. I've taught myself musical instruments on my own. But again, I've sort of hit a ceiling because I don't push myself hard enough to keep advancing in all the technical components. And so I'm not good enough. Whereas if I had a teacher and someone checking up on me every day and giving me tasks and giving me assignments, practice assignments, then I would be forced to get better at it because they would be checking on me, and I'd have to perform for them. And if I messed up, they would say, well, nope, here, we got to work on this some more. Let's do it better now. And there's constantly someone checking up on you. And so it's the same, again, music, sports. That's what a coach's job is to say, hey, you're not throwing that football correctly. You're not dribbling correctly. Let's revisit this. Let me demonstrate for you. Let's go over it again. Let me show you. Now you do it. Now you do it again. Nope, that's not quite right. Let's do it again. That's the accountability that has to happen in any sort of education environment, whether it's in a classroom or outside of a classroom. So in order to make things automatic, you have to have someone, well, you don't have to, but from a true teaching standpoint, that's our job, is to be the person who holds the student accountable. Because kids aren't going to do it on their own. And if they want to do it on their own, great. But again, they might be in danger of reaching a ceiling where they kind of get sick of it and they're like, I don't really care about this anymore. And then they either quit or they just maximize whatever potential they had. But if we want them to be truly advancing to these higher levels of high school and into college or beyond, there needs to be accountability. When I was an elementary school teacher, one of the reasons I got out of elementary school teaching and I thought, well, I'll go teach adults, and so I went back to grad school and then became a college professor, is there was no accountability at the lower level. There was for me as the teacher, but in the other 16 hours of that kid's life each day, there wasn't any accountability. For the most part, the parents didn't care, and my administrators pretty much didn't care. I had situations where the thing that really, the straw that broke the camel's back for me was my third year. Things had been piling up, but I had a girl in my class who showed up, I don't know, 20 minutes late to class every morning, every single day. And so I would tell her, hey, school starts, whatever it was, 8 o'clock or whatever time we started. And she's like, I know, but my mom, she oversleeps every day. I'm like, well, you got to tell your mom or you need to set your own alarm clock. I know she was only 11 years old, but like, okay, I had an alarm clock when I was that age. So, set your own alarm. You get yourself up. And then eventually when conference time came around, I would speak to the mom like, hey, school starts at this time. You can't show up late because we're already into the first lesson of the day. So she comes in, which I would find my college students do later on, who are like, hey, what are we doing? What are we working on? Can someone catch me up? It's like, no, you're way behind already. And the mom would say, oh, well, I work these late shifts and, I have a hard time getting up in the morning and getting her here. And I'm like, I don't care. This is your job. Get your kid to school on time. Well, nothing would change. So I went to my principal. I'd say, can you please do so? I've talked to the mom. I've talked to the kid. I mark her tardy every day. She misses the first assignment every day. So her grade is plummeting for that subject area. Can you please say something to this family? And the principal was like, no, I can't, that's their family and, they've got their struggles. And so, we'll just do the best we can. And I was like, yeah, then why? And I said this to her and she was not happy with me. I was like, well, then why have any rules at all around here? What's the point of any of this? If we can't follow a simple rule like School starts at this time. Everyone needs to be here at that time. If we can't do that, then why do we have any other rules? If we can just change our mind and not follow them, then none of this matters. So what are we doing here? And she was not thrilled with my point that I was making. So, but then later that same year, I had another kid who didn't do any work the whole year. He was a problem, caused behavior issues, not necessarily every day, but several times a week. I had to kick him out of class or reprimand him, or I called his mom into my office and say, here's what's going on. Please do something about this at home, because I can, all I can do is send him to the principal's office, and she didn't do anything, obviously. And so, at home, Mom, you need to do something about this. And she didn't, of course. And it was always the teacher's fault. Like, oh, why aren't you, giving him things to do or getting him excited about learning? Like, no, man, this is you. He doesn't know how to behave. He's not accountable. You're not holding him accountable. And again, time came at the end of the year. I went to my principal. I was like, this kid didn't do any work all year long. He literally has a 0 in these classes. He hasn't turned in any homework or done well on any test. So I'm recommending that we flunk him. So he'll have to do this again. And the principal's like, nope, we have to pass him on. So don't worry about it. We can't do anything about it at this point. So it's, again, I was like, okay, I'm done. I'm leaving this place because there's no accountability. And so it's the same thing. The same thing happens at the upper levels, where when teachers give, late work breaks. Well, you don't have it today. Just bring it in tomorrow, or it's not a big deal. Or, whether it's attendance or, makeup exams. Like, well, you didn't do well on that test. I'll give you another chance to take another test. Like, when you have all these, what we think are compassionate techniques for helping these kids, all you're doing is not holding them accountable. So we have to, again, as a coach, as a music teacher, as a regular classroom teacher, you have to say, here's what we're aiming at. I'm going to help you reach this point. And then after that, we're going to go to the next point. We're going to go to the next level. But if you can't do that, I'm going to correct you. There may even be consequences. Maybe there's detention. Maybe it's, getting points docked off on the homework. Maybe you don't get to participate in your sport that week because your grades have dipped below the eligibility line. Whatever it is, there has to be consequences, because the teacher needs to hold students accountable. And it helps if parents do that first. And then, of course, administrators help the teacher out as well. But if there's no accountability, the level of learning is never going to be very high, because, like all people, children are going to give up when things get hard, because that's human nature. If things get difficult, unless I have my own very intense goal that I'm trying to achieve on my own, I'm going to stop. Just like learning a musical instrument, I didn't care enough to learn all of the details of playing those instruments properly. So I didn't. So I stopped. And so now I just play for fun. So that's what happens. You reach a ceiling, and our kids, for that ceiling is getting lower and lower, as we can see by the behavior problems, as we can see by the test scores. We just keep letting things slide as parents, as administrators, as teachers. And again, we can't be successful from a learning standpoint if there's no accountability. The third A. It's sort of a combination. It's the workload that goes into making something automatic, and it's the accountability portion. The third A is apprenticeship. This is really what education should be. Education should be a student learning under the direct watch of an experienced professional, in this case, a teacher. When you learn how to fix a car, all right, most of the time, people don't figure out how to repair something in a car just by tinkering around. Usually, people who are interested in cars, they learn from their dad or their granddad, or the neighbor who always was working on a car, and the kid walks over and is like, hey, what are you doing? And here, let me show you this. You learn with having that older, more experienced person right there with you, showing you the way. And so whether it's working on a car where you go, here, let me show you how to fix this part and replace it. And, the kid doesn't know anything, or the young person learning doesn't know anything. And the older person says, so here's this part, and here's what it does, and here's why it's broken, and we need to fix it. And so the first step we're going to do is we're going to take this off right here. And, you move the wrench this way. And the guy says, here, why don't you try it? Why don't you try loosening this up so you feel what it's like to take out this piece from the car? And so then you try it. And maybe you mess up a little bit or you do it the wrong way and they go, well, nope, let me show you again. Here's how you do it. Now you do it again. It's a constant back and forth of guiding the student through the process. Again, same thing on the basketball court with my players where, yes, I talk to the whole team, but I also talk to each kid individually and I show them individually. Here's what I want when you're dribbling. Here's what I want when you're getting ready to shoot. Here's the position I want you in defense. I'm talking to them individually. Now, the big question that is certainly to pop up is, well, what do you do in a giant classroom? And yes, when you reach a certain threshold, that is potentially a problem. But even in my classrooms where I was teaching writing, okay, where, it's incredibly time expensive to teach writing, what I would do is in my college classrooms, I'd have 24 students usually. And I would structure the class so that I was going around and meeting with each student. I'd try to at least once a day. If I couldn't get to them that day, I would definitely get to them the next day. And yes, I'm teaching a whole class. And yes, there are times where I'm talking to the whole class and, doing demonstrations on the board and, pulling up materials on my computer and all that kind of stuff. You're teaching everyone. But what I would constantly do is create opportunities for, even in a small way, that apprenticeship teaching model where I'm meeting with you one-on-one about your task, your project, whatever it is you're working on. And you will feel like I'm your personal tutor, your personal professor. And even if it's only for a couple minutes, you will get that sense that I'm here with you, I'm watching what you're doing, I'm correcting in real time what you're doing, I'm going to ask you to try it again, and then I'll come back and review it again, and we'll improve on it, and we'll go to the next thing together. It feels like it's a one-on-one session, even though it's done with 24 other people. And I would constantly say, this is how this needs to go. And I would tell the other teachers who were below me, like my employees that I hired, because I was the boss of my program, and I'd say, here's what I want you to implement in your classes. Create as many of these apprenticeship components of your class as you possibly can. Don't just talk to the whole class all the time. Create opportunities to meet one-on-one whenever you can. And, they would have a hard time with it because it's like, well, there's so many kids in here. So come watch me. And so I would invite teachers to my classrooms all the time. And I'd say, watch how I meet with every student. And so I would do it. And over a course of an hour and 15-minute class period, I would go around and meet with all 24 students at some point. And we would work on that assignment together where I'm watching, they're typing, I'm reading and saying, yeah, this sentence is pretty good, but this next sentence, I want you to clean this up. It's a little confusing. I'm going to come back in 2 minutes. I want to see a different sentence there. So give that a try. And I'll go and help someone else. And then I'll come back. And the students constantly feel my presence guiding them through this thing they're working on. Just like a granddad guiding their 13-year-old through fixing a part in their car. Okay? It's the same. My wife is from a family of plumbers. Her grandfather, her father, her brother, they're very good with their hands and good at fixing stuff. And so they've all owned plumbing businesses. And how do you think they all learned how to be plumbers? Well, to be a plumber, you need to be an apprentice under somebody, someone who takes you to a job and shows you, all right, we got hired to fix this lady's hot water heater. Here's how we do this. And you demonstrate for that younger employee, here's the parts we're using, here's the tools, here's how you deal with the water and the electricity and all the stuff that goes into plumbing. And you guide them through it. And then while you're standing there with them, you have them try parts of it, the easy parts. And then you gradually get a little better at it. And by several jobs, you say, okay, I want you to try this one and I'm gonna see how you do. And you let them do it for as far as they can. And then you come in and help when they get stuck. And after a long time, then they can go deal with people's plumbing problems on their own because you've trained them in an apprentice model. So whether it's in class, like I try to do, or if you need to figure out ways of doing it outside of class where you say part of your class experience in this course is you have to come to my office for 30 minutes a week. All right? Or 30 minutes twice a month, maybe. All right? So that we can meet in a personal way with no other distractions. It's just you and me working on this essay, or you and me talking about this history topic, or you and me working on this chemistry lab thing. Whatever class it is, you have to create a situation, as many as you can, for the apprentice model to occur. If all you're doing as a teacher is talking to the group, There's nothing wrong with that. I'm not anti-lecture like some people are. I think there's value in transmitting as much content publicly as you can. That doesn't necessarily mean those students are going to learn it very well, though. Okay, some students will be fine. They're able to focus. They're able to take notes and listen and all that stuff. But some students aren't. And so the way to supplement those lectures is, it's not just, oh, let's do homework. That's part of it. It's not just here's a group activity. That might be part of it. But you have to create an apprenticeship model of education where you are leading that student on their individualized path of learning, because some students are going to get things faster than others. And so you need to be able to adjust to all that. And the flaw in thinking is what's been going on ever since I became a public school teacher is this differentiated learning. It's like, well, do students learn different things at different levels? Well, of course they do, because every kid's different. That doesn't mean, though, in the classroom, you have differentiated learning. That's not where it happens. It happens in the apprentice style learning, okay? Where you can meet individually with kids and kind of take 2 steps back, rebuild some basics, go forward from there, and you can do that with all of your kids. And I know it's very difficult. Like I said, I had people come observe my classes and they would see it and they're like, how did you meet with all those kids all in one class period? That seems impossible. It's like, yeah, I can do it. So it takes a little practice, but you can figure it out. You just got to be really organized and you have to know your students really well. And even though I would teach 4 classes of 24 students, so that 96 kids I might meet with individually in a single day. Yeah, it's tiring. It takes a lot of energy because you're jumping from that kid's unique project he's working on to another kid and to another kid. Yeah, it's I was wiped at the end of those days, but that's what you do. You've got to create opportunities for kids to feel like I'm getting my learning from this teacher, not only in the large group environment, but that guy or that woman cares about me enough to want to talk to me individually and guide me through this problem I'm having of writing this research paper or, dealing with this math, equation or whatever it is. The individual opportunities, you're not only the teacher for everyone, you're also like a personal tutor for the students. So that's where it all comes together. And this is why the deliberate practice is so important, is because you practice enough to make it automatic. You have to have someone there watching to make sure you're doing it right. So that's the accountability. And the only way that really happens truly effectively is when you take teaching to an apprentice model. All right. Yes, you can be a good teacher where you have 30 kids in front of you. I'm not saying that doesn't work sometimes. But if you want to truly be a good teacher and you want students to learn at their maximum level, those 3 A's are really where it's at. Getting things automatic, holding kids accountable, and creating an apprenticeship environment is how you do it. I'm not necessarily big on the class size debate. I think there's some mixed research on that. I think, for a good teacher, I never cared how many students were in my classes. I know some teachers were like, "Oh, I really want to keep it under 20," and I was like, "You give the rest to me. Give me the overflow. I don't care, because for me, teaching 30 isn't that different from teaching 20." All right. Now, at a certain point, it is a lot different, but in a normal sized classroom, I didn't care because a good teacher can handle it. And so if I had a teacher who wasn't as experienced or just wasn't as good at certain things as I was, I'd be like, "That's fine. I'll give you the smaller class. Give me everyone else. That's fine." But this is the strongest argument for the smaller classroom model, is it creates more opportunities for an apprenticeship type of instruction. Many teachers make the argument of, well, I need smaller classes because of the grading or because of behavior, or, we can move at a faster pace. All of those things are true. I'm not disputing those things. But again, a good teacher can get around those things. I don't have any more behavior problems with 30 kids as I would with 20 kids. It's no different. Okay, if you're a good classroom manager, it doesn't really matter. I would give lectures in front of 100 students sometimes, and I could keep them all focused and quiet and behaving properly without any problem, because I know how to teach that size of a class and maintain order and structure. The grading, when you're good at grading, more is not very fun, but you create systems to make it easier on yourself, and that's what I did. And so it wasn't about class size for me isn't about how much grading I have to do. It's not about discipline problems. It's not about what kinds of activities I can have the kids do. It's about how many times can I talk to that kid individually. That's the goal. How many hours in the day can I set aside to inviting kids to my office to strengthen that apprenticeship model of teaching, so we can go over what we talked about in class, so that if I can tell that kid already gets it, what can I challenge this kid with that's new? Let's push that kid a little further. That's what we're aiming at. So I know it's difficult, especially in large classroom and large school environments, but the goal of teaching is to practice with purpose. My dad always used to say, it's an old cliche, but this is what he would always tell me is, and I tell this to my players and my students. I always have them fill in the blank. Practice makes what? And the kids will go, perfect. It's like, no, practice does not make perfect. Okay. Things can always be better. You're never going to be perfect, probably. So we're not aiming at perfection. Practice makes permanent. So what you do, the habits you create, what you deliberately repeat becomes what you are. And so that's where the deliberate practice comes. You better be practicing properly, because if you're not practicing properly, or if you're only going half speed, or you're only studying half the material, you're distracted while you're trying to do your homework. Like, if you're not doing it properly, that's who you become. It becomes permanent. You're constantly a distracted person. You're constantly someone who only knows half the material. You're constantly someone who doesn't do things properly. You're sloppy in whatever it is you're doing, playing an instrument or practicing your sport, whatever it is. You have to practice properly, because that's what becomes permanent. So it's an old cliche, but even kids today don't know it. You say practice makes, they say perfect. And you have to say no. Practice makes permanent. Whatever it is you're practicing, that's who you're going to become. So you better make sure you're practicing right. The way you practice properly is you do it properly to make it automatic. But the way you practice properly is to have accountability, and ideally to have an apprentice model where someone older, wiser, smarter, better is teaching you, and you try and copy them. That's when I was teaching my composition classes. That was always my goal. I would say, look, I'm not saying I'm the best person at this, but I am an expert. Okay. I've been doing this forever. I have a PhD in this. I've written 1 million essays. I know how it goes. So you can trust me. And when I say this is a really, really good way of doing it, I want you to copy me. That's what I want you to do. I want to demonstrate for you the right way. And then I'm going to model it so that you can follow it. And once I see that you can copy me and do it repetitively so that it's automatic, okay, maybe then if you want, we'll get a little exploratory and you can try a different style, or whatever. That's fine. But I need to see that this way is automatic for you, because then I know you've got it. You're smart enough. You're on the right track. We don't have to worry about this anymore. Too much of education, and this is where a lot of the disputes revolve around, well, we want to let kids explore. We want to let kids be creative. We want to let kids discover things on their own. It's like, yes, some of that is true. I'm a big believer in play. I'm a big believer in leaving kids alone and letting them go do, things they want to do, find out what they like, find out what they're good at. But in a true education context, whether it's a classroom or not, you have to instruct them, because there are proper ways of doing things. So while you could say, and again, I believe this to a certain degree, that, we need to let kids go to the basketball court and just play and have fun and figure stuff out for themselves. They'll learn how to dribble properly and pass properly. Just let them, if they like it, they'll learn it, and, they'll get there eventually. They just need to follow their own timetable and, let them be kids and let them learn. It's like, sort of, that can happen. But again, it either leads to things getting really sloppy because they're doing things the wrong way, or again, they max out because they only just do the things that are fun, not the things that they actually need. And so letting kids just do things on their own doesn't fully work. Again, I'm not saying every minute of every day should be planned out for them and there should be a teacher instructing every single thing. I'm not saying that. There needs to be time for play. I completely agree with that. But from a learning standpoint, the only way true learning occurs is if, like I said, if it's deliberate, where you say, I deliberately want to learn this thing. I'm learning with a purpose. Here's why I need to learn this. And then a good teacher builds on that using that zone of proximal development, making connections to kids that they have an emotional relatability to. This is what I always do when I'm teaching literature, especially, is doesn't matter that we're reading Shakespeare. I take that idea from Shakespeare and say, hey, have you ever been in a situation where you overheard someone saying something mean and you wanted to get back at them by saying something mean about them? Like, this is what happens in all of Shakespeare's plays. So you can build that relatability and those emotional connections so that it goes from just the working memory into the long-term memory, with some very simple techniques. But that's the goal. So when you hear the cognitive load theory and they talk about like the basic levels of gathering the information and then processing it and then moving it towards that longer term memory, this stuff has been around forever. It's just, it was the anticipatory set from the 90s when I was in school. It's like, yeah, you need to get kids kind of intrigued by what you're doing. So you need to start them on something they can connect to, something that's easy enough for them to accomplish before you start throwing things at them that they don't understand. And it helps to make it relatable so that they want to keep learning about it and they find that there's something valuable for them, because that's what helps speed the process towards long-term memory. We remember things that have emotional valency for us. So if it doesn't have an emotional connection for you, then it's going to be very difficult to move to long-term memory. So those are all things that everyone who's a good teacher anyway has been doing forever. And we've gotten off the path with some of this, like, no, let the kids figure it out for themselves. And, stop doing the direct instruction. Like, don't tell kids exactly what to do. Don't give them the right answer. Let them kind of figure it out for themselves. That's not how learning works. And so if you just remember, okay, I need to get kids to understand this thing automatically. They need to know it so well that they don't even have to think about it anymore. It's in their brain for good. If you have that as your ultimate goal, instead of, well, I need them to learn. Yeah, but for what? For why? Well, to take a test to achieve the state standard. Like, no, I believe in standards, but like the goal is to make things automatic. And you do that by holding them strictly accountable, using deliberate practice. And the best way to do that is to make as many opportunities for an apprenticeship model as possible. And an apprenticeship model isn't that you're, the cliche of like the guide on the side. It's like, no, you're still in charge. You're the leader. All right. There's been the again, jargon debate of, well, should you be a sage on a stage or a guide on the side? It's like, well, you're kind of both. You are a sage on the side. That's what the apprentice model is. You are the wise person in this classroom. You're the one who has the answers. And you're the one who's also going to come alongside that student and push them where they need to be pushed, go back and review where they need to review, and you guide them through this process of learning, because they're not going to get there on their own. They're just not. Again, they're either going to do things the wrong way, or they're going to max out and they'll be like, oh, this isn't fun anymore, I quit. So for a good teacher to get kids where we want them, it requires that personalized apprenticeship model. And in my materials that I create online, they're intended to be worked through with that in that model. All right. I don't want kids looking into my courses and just sitting there on their laptop by themselves going through and watching my lectures. That's not it. I purposefully design it so that the parent or another teacher is there with them and asking them questions and following up and saying, is anything here confusing? It's all meant to be that apprenticeship model. And yes, I'm delivering it in an online format where it feels distant because you're just looking at me on a screen like you are right now. But again, the activities, the questions, the prompts, the way I explain things are meant for you as a parent or you as a teacher to work in conjunction with that student in an apprentice model. You are a mentor in that type of content area. In my case, it's English. So education is not hard. Okay, we've made it very hard and confusing by constantly reinventing the basics, constantly using this jargon that doesn't help us clarify anything. It just makes you look like you're cool and sound smart when, no, you're just saying something that we all learned about 30 years ago. And if you just remember these 3 A's, make things automatic, hold kids accountable, and build apprentice model teaching environments, that will solve pretty much all of the problems that we have in education. And we won't need all the fancy terminology. We won't need to reinvent things constantly. We'll just do the basics because that's what works. Follow the 3 A's And whether it's in your family or in your classroom, your students will learn a lot faster and a lot better because it will stick with them in the long term. And that's what real learning actually is. Thanks for watching. See you next time.